Today is the 2-year anniversary of Sebastian Rogers going missing. We are going to be talking about the numerous interviews done by Seth Rogers and Chris and Katie Proudfoot today. Let's discuss. All right. So we went down the multitude of rabbit holes. This is more like an ant colony where you just get down there and then there's so many paths to follow. It's pretty wild. There was so many people and good thing too. I mean, the main thing about a missing child case is getting that information out. So there was a ton of people that were just trying to keep the message out, keep Sebastian's name and face in the media, spread the word, which is all commendable.
Yes.
This case in particular just got a little bit wild. And there's people who are so invested in this case and so invested in Sebastian. A lot of theories have come about this case, and there's always going to be. I mean, there's always, people are going to have their opinions or their theories, and we're going to discuss those in the next episode. Today, we're going to discuss these interviews.
Yeah.
Seth did a ton of them. Seth Rogers is Sebastian's biological father, and his thing the whole time was, I just want his name and face out there. I'm going to get on as many, whoever's covering this, I'm going to get on and talk with them just so that I can, keep Sebastian's name out there, keep his, picture out there, and just keep people looking for my son. Completely commendable. His message and story stayed pretty consistent throughout all of those interviews. There was several times where new information would come to light. Some of it's kind of controversial. But for the most part, Seth Rogers kept a pretty calm, collected, neutral, position throughout most of these interviews, just focused on, searching, looking for his son, and keeping everybody else, keeping their eyes open for him as well. He stated that he was at work. He works for, at the time, I don't know if he still does or not. I know he took a leave of absence to look for his son, but that was 2 years ago. But at the time, he was working for the Davidson County Sheriff's Office. He worked in the detention center. So I did hear two different things, that he was either on the floor or he was in the parking garage. So I don't know what post he was on that night with certainty, but I know that the Sumner County Sheriff's Office, obviously that's a super easy thing to check because when you're on duty like that, you can't, you're on duty in a detention center. You're just accountable as all of the inmates. So you're not going to just be able to slip away and go do anything. So regardless of what post he was on, he was definitely at work. He stated that he found out about Sebastian missing because Chris Proudfoot, who is Sebastian's stepdad, married Sebastian's biological mother, Katie, that Chris had texted him and said that Sebastian was missing. So he didn't get that until he got back to his phone at the end of his shift. He said they could have called, to the jail, spoke to a supervisor, said that there was a family emergency. They didn't do that. He did try, I believe from what Seth said, that he did have a missed call from Chris, and then he had a text message. He said as soon as he got to his car, he just drove straight to Sebastian's house to help in searching for him from that point. Seth has said from the beginning, everybody's innocent until proven guilty. He has very deliberately not pointed fingers at anyone, including Chris and Katie Proudfoot. Now, like I said, there was a little bit of drama that came up, a little bit of frustration on Seth's part, that he was, I remember in one interview saying that he wasn't particularly proud of, kind of, mudslinging a little bit, I guess. But he was frustrated. He was upset. There was stuff that came up in these interviews that he hadn't been aware of prior. And as a biological parent with shared custody of your child, I can see how that might be a little bit upsetting to find out about these things that had affected your child pretty dramatically, and not being told about them and finding out about them through social media. So that's understandable. But for the most part, he kept a pretty cool, calm, diplomatic, tone throughout most of his interviews, and just really focused on the searches for Sebastian, Sebastian's name, keeping Sebastian's face, saying thank you, for keeping him in the media. He was very Sebastian centric in his interviews, in my opinion. What's your overall feel about Seth's interviews? And he did a ton of them. There's a ton of them out there. He would hop on pretty much any live stream, any, content creator, any YouTuber that was doing a thing on Sebastian to try to get the word out, he would hop on. So there was a ton of them. You can definitely go to YouTube and just search and go down the rabbit hole as well. I mean, a lot of you have already been following this case from the beginning, and a lot of these happened in those first few weeks and months of Sebastian going missing. Now there have been some updates and some stuff since then, and we've just been immersing ourselves in these interviews and videos and everything. So what's your take on just like overall Seth's interviews?
I think I agree with you. It's hard when you are the parent of a child going missing. I mean, they say that is the worst thing to happen to a parent is to lose the child. And so while I feel, Seth kind of has this dichotomy going on where he has that panic response where he is like, let me be on everything. I just want to be a part of it. I want to chase down every lead with law enforcement, with the people helping in the searches. But then you're right, when he gets on, it's not to point fingers. It's not to speak even to any of the theories that have been going on. It's just this continuation of, this is what we know to be true. Can anybody give us more information? And, again, more so commenting on what he would like Sebastian to hear from him and what he's felt is most likely happening or where he would like to see the investigation go next. And so I agree with you. I think he's played a very good part of being like the backbone of this investigation. And not only has he kept Sebastian's name out as widely as he possibly can, I think that by putting himself and his own face in the media, it also does this thing where if Sebastian is out there searching, there is a decent chance he will one day see one of these and say like, oh, that's my dad. And so it gives me like goosebumps even just saying that. But I think his response was incredible. And he, I think from day one has been very open, very honest, and just truly a dad. And that is always keeping your child first. And so,
Yeah. And one thing that I thought was interesting about Seth's interviews is that most of his communication that he spoke about, and this is even prior to Sebastian going missing, was primarily with Chris. So it did come out later in interviews that Seth spoke on himself about stuff that happened in California during the time that him and Katie were going through a divorce. So there was a CPS situation down there where Katie had claimed that that Seth had, I believe, struck Sebastian. She also, I think, got a protective order out against Seth in California, stating that he had, I believe that was the same incident that he had struck Sebastian. Because I did hear him reference one time in another video that, it was one of the things that he said that Sebastian might be out, potentially in a homeless camp or something like that, because he's like, I have been homeless and people take care of each other, when they're homeless, you help each other out. And so then this kind of, he said that, earlier on, and then this kind of went into detail as to how he ended up homeless. And that's because these protection orders pretty much require you to immediately leave the residence, and so he didn't have anywhere else to live. I believe also that they were still living on the base at the time because Katie was in the military. So he just, he was just put out. He was living in his car, and he was struggling to get an apartment or a place to rent where he could get visitation with Sebastian. He said that case with the CPS in California was completely dismissed. They did go through the divorce, but I believe that Seth said that Katie was already with Chris like before their divorce was final. So I don't know exactly what the catalyst was for their divorce. I don't know if that was ever divulged, and if Chris was in the picture at that time. I don't know. But Chris was in the picture before their divorce was completely final. So Chris was already in the family dynamics in California before they all decided to move to Tennessee. So that was one thing that kind of was getting thrown back and forth, is these CPS allegations.
Yeah.
And because that was one of the things that Seth brought up also, was the CPS investigation that he heard about over social media, was that Sebastian had gone to school and said that Chris hit him with a belt. Mm-hmm. And so then there was a CPS investigation opened up into Chris for using a belt on Sebastian. Mm-hmm. Now, in the state of Tennessee, if it is a controlled punishment, so it's not, like one whack with the intent of discipline, it's not a crime. Now, it's very easy to go past that, and there's a lot of nuances that you have to really do. That's what here it's not CPS, it's the Department of Child Services, DCS in Tennessee. So they do an investigation. They speak to Sebastian, they speak to the parents, they see if this is an ongoing thing, if it's an isolated event, and they have to determine, like, is this child being abused, or was it an act of discipline? The issue arose, I believe, with Seth and this situation, is that according to him, they had an agreement that there would be no corporal punishment.
Right.
And the other issue, too, is that Sebastian is autistic.
Yeah.
So there, anytime you have a special needs child, like, it's just not the same. Like, you don't necessarily punish or discipline in the same way that you would, say, a 15-year-old who's out, drinking and smoking and stealing cars or something like that, So it's just different. So I believe Seth was pretty upset about that. People online got very upset about this incident with Chris using the belt. Chris did say that was the one and only time he had ever done that. A lot of people are upset because it's not his biological child. But I think it's really difficult, because if you are a step parent, and in parent dynamics, if you have a 2-parent home, there's usually one person that does the discipline. It's not always the case, but oftentimes there's one parent that does the discipline. Like, everybody has their strengths, and it's typically one parent that does the discipline. So if Katie's not doing the discipline, then it would fall onto Chris.
Right.
As the step parent. Now, if there's an agreement with the biological father about what that discipline is going to look like, then that needs to be followed. But there can't be a situation where there's no discipline because the step parent can't discipline.
Right.
So that gets a little bit tricky, but we're not going to get into the weeds of all of that because, obviously we're not there. We're not involved in this parenting. But that was a big ordeal on social media with the public. A lot of people got very upset on Seth's behalf. So that was a little bit of the drama with that. And then these CPS allegations going back and forth. And, basically, each side saying, well, this isn't perfect and this isn't perfect. And but I think ultimately nobody ever said, well, I take that back. There was the time when Seth was getting frustrated and saying that Katie wasn't being an adult and she wasn't being a parent, and said that there was 2 or 3 times prior to this where Sebastian had left. And Chris and Katie said the whole time that Sebastian was not an eloper, that he didn't run away, that he wasn't a runner. So that was kind of contradictory. What were these other incidences? They never really got expanded upon. But he did say, I'm actually on that page right now. 3rd time Sebastian has gone missing in Chris and Katie's care. He said this in an interview on the Court TV channel on April 6, 2024. And then this is also when he disclosed the sexual abuse of Sebastian. Apparently, according to Seth, Chris was threatening to expose this and saying that if they did expose it, that nobody would look for Sebastian.
Yeah.
So Seth, I think, just kind of was frustrated with this whole situation. And so he just kind of like got ahead of the ball and just said, listen, I'm just going to put it out there, because then you can't hold it over my head. And it's just, out there. So apparently when Sebastian was 7 years old, he was sexually assaulted by an older boy. Mm-hmm. And Seth said the parents knew and allowed Sebastian to be with this child. There was a post that supposedly Katie posted on Facebook saying that it wasn't a 13-year-old child and that they didn't allow this behavior to, they didn't knowingly allow this behavior. And he was going to therapy. He was, it was reported. So I believe that it wasn't something that was, that they knew was happening, because they wouldn't have, they wouldn't have reported it and got him therapy and all that kind of stuff. Right. If it had been something that they were allowing to happen. Mm-hmm. But then Seth also made an allegation that they had left him alone with a convicted sex offender. Mm-hmm. And that was the time that Seth had sent a wellness check over to the house. I should circle back and say that Seth did choose to follow Chris and Katie to Tennessee so that he could be here with his child. Yeah. Because they were in California previously. It's very expensive out there. I don't know if that was when Katie got discharged from the Army, if she had finished up her service and then, left the service or whatever. I don't know. I didn't hear exactly what her career trajectory was at the time, but they, I think, all collectively decided to move to Tennessee. Yeah. And I think that's good. I think it was a good, thing that they were still in a place, even with how their divorce was going and all of the other stuff going on with that was a decision that I think was made, together. So, because they did have shared custody of Sebastian still. So yeah, there was just a lot that got put out over this whole time. Seth was saying that yes, there was some issues. So both sides kind of admitted that yes, there were some issues, and that Sebastian had issues with personal space and stuff like that. Again, he's autistic, but anytime a child has that kind of trauma and it's not properly addressed, it's not properly treated, it's not properly, I guess addressed is the best word. There's going to be, things that happen as a result of that. This is one of the things that kind of made me question, though, is supposedly, and I believe, again, we're still on Seth's interviews, that Seth stated that Chris didn't want Sebastian around his daughter, Faith. Mm-hmm. Chris does not have custody or like full-time custody of Faith, so Faith doesn't live with them. Mm-hmm. But he supposedly was making statements about how he didn't want Sebastian around Faith. But then Seth was saying, oh, but him and Faith are really close. And even like one time I picked, so anytime Faith came over, Sebastian would go to Seth's house, to his father's house. But he's like, oh yeah, they would FaceTime, so they were close, they got along. But what I guess I didn't understand is in one of Katie's interviews is she said on the day before Sebastian went missing, or on the 25th, that, because this was one of the first interviews, it wasn't the very first interview, but it was one of the first, it was one of the early days, maybe this on the 7th day or so. It was one of the early days interviews with Chris and Katie where they were both sitting there and she was recounting the events of the day, and she looked at Chris. Chris is supposedly in Memphis and wasn't there, but she looks at Chris to confirm that she went and picked up her niece, or their niece. So it was actually Chris's sister's daughter. Mm-hmm. Katie made it sound like she called to see if they could pick up their niece, and that she picked up the niece and they all went shopping together with Sebastian. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, if you're out and about, but why, if you're concerned about your daughter Faith, would you not be concerned about your niece?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
but then I also saw a screenshot of a Facebook post from Chris's sister who said that they all went shopping together. So it was her, I think her child and the other niece. They all went shopping together. But why didn't Katie mention that? That's one of the issues that a lot of people are having, is that not everything's really lining up. There's so much contradictory information. Mm-hmm. And so, but that was one thing, that Seth introduced, was that Chris was uncomfortable having Sebastian around Faith. So, which we're going to get more into this, into the theory section. So I'm not going to go too far into that right now because there's so many questions. There's so many questions.
Yeah, very much.
Is there anything else about Seth's interviews before we jump into Chris and Katie's interviews? Because there's so much to talk about there.
Yes. I think for the most part, as far as Seth's interviews, I think that he like kind of maintains this ownership of where his parenting might have gone wrong, and then also has done a really good job of kind of discussing like some of the facts of it. Like I know there was one where they kind of discussed like the shoe situation, and there was a lot of question about Sebastian going barefoot and how out of character that was for him. And so I liked, it was with an interview with Seth where Nancy Grace kind of discussed why that's significant for him. And it appeared that at Katie's house, Sebastian's house, where he spent most of his time, there were 3 pairs of shoes, and we know that there's only 3 because they had just bought some the day before on that like shopping trip. And so it was a very big deal that Sebastian wouldn't leave. Maybe not generally, but at the very least in the past when he's run away, it has been with shoes on, and it's because of, this trauma with the anthill. And so...
and that was addressed by both Seth and the Proudfoots, is that Sebastian had this incident that he was barefoot and stepped in a fire ant hill, and his feet got bit up and his legs and everything else. And so now he does not like to go outside without shoes. And Chris also said in an interview that Sebastian does not like to get dirty. And Katie said he loves animals, but he does not like insects. So that says a lot, because if he is that terrified of insects, like if he is, and he does not like to get dirty, the likelihood of him crawling into caves and stuff, I mean, maybe because people do stuff if they're desperate, if they're cold, they're in the elements or whatever, like you're going to do stuff you wouldn't normally do if you had, other options. But it makes it a little bit harder to believe that he's just out, trekking through the woods and stuff like that.
Right.
So they did both agree on the shoe situation. And Seth also said that Sebastian was in this growth spurt period where he was having a hard time staying in shoes. So that's another reason why it might be more accountable that, we know exactly how many shoes he has, because he was, growing out of shoes, and they were having to buy more shoes. And I think he said something too, like they weren't buying a lot of shoes because he was growing out of shoes so quickly. So, why buy 5-10 pairs of shoes if he's not going to fit into them like 3-6 months from now?
And I think they agreed too that anytime he grew out of a pair of shoes, it wasn't like they were thrown in the back of the closet like mine certainly do. It was Miss Proudfoot was very serious about getting rid of them, and and they both, I think, agreed on the fact that there were, for him, only 3 options, and they were all there.
And I guess kind of as a way to kind of overlap before we get, go directly from Seth to the Proudfoots interviews, is the stuff that they both put out and agreed on. So the shoes, the fire ants, they all said, that Sebastian loved his video games, but they both said in both households that Sebastian did not have access to the internet. So they did, although Seth did say that on his gaming system, his was online, but it was on his account, so it would have been his contacts only. And but that, he said that was limited, but he didn't want his own account. He just wanted to play. He wasn't interested in the social aspect of it. He did not have I guess data on his phone, so it was basically like he could use it for calculator, for flashlight, for texting, calling, but it may be some games on the phone. But he didn't have access to social media, and that was apparently intentional on both sides. So at mom and dad's house, because he was 15, and then they both said this too, like he's 15 in age but not 15 in mental development yet. And so they were a little bit more cautious with it's scary out there
Yeah.
on the internet.
Yeah.
So it's always a concern. And then with them not being completely confident in him having the maturity to kind of handle that and navigate that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that apparently was something on both sides. And they also said that all of the electronics were checked. So and we discussed that last time too, because law enforcement also said that. But all of the phones, game systems, everything was checked. So everybody's pretty confident, both sides and law enforcement, that it wasn't anybody that he met through any of these channels.
Yeah.
Excuse me. They all said that he was not a runner. Mm-hmm. Seth said basically if he was running that he would have probably come to his house. Yeah. Katie did say that, there was no reason for him to run away to Seth's house, because anytime he wanted to go, he would just say, I want to go to Dad's house, and they would arrange it. So it wasn't like there was this huge kind of custody fight or this possession of Sebastian where they weren't, willing to kind of be flexible with that visitation. Was there anything else that you remember that kind of they both touched on and agreed on?
Let's see.
Oh, that was the other thing. I just turned to this page. So Seth said that he watched that full 10-minute video. So this is something that is controversial, is the flashlight, which we're going to, talk about, theories next time. But one thing that both Seth and Chris said is that that video was debunked. Mm-hmm. So Seth said that he watched the entire 10-minute video, and it had time stamped at 3:11 a.m. Mm-hmm. But he said when he started watching this 10-minute video at the beginning, it said 3:11 a.m. And when he finished watching it 10 minutes later, it still said 3:11 a.m. Mm-hmm. So the time stamping was off on it. So that's why they figured it was the garbage truck. Okay. But he said that he believed that it was what law enforcement said, that what was released to the media was a cropped version of that video. Yeah. And that if you look at the whole video, that it was a little bit more obvious. Okay. And Chris Proudfoot also put that out in an interview, that was confirmed that it was not flashlights. So apparently there's people that still are holding strong to this flashlight theory, even though both sets of parents and law enforcement are saying that that is not what that was. But the parents agree with law enforcement that it was not. So I think that pretty much covers
Seth's side.
Yeah, Seth's side and kind of the overlap of what they both agreed on.
So then looking at the Proudfoots, because we kind of talked about how we felt Seth's overall presence was. What is your take on now the presence of Chris and Katie?
Yeah, we're getting in deep now.
I think it depends on what interview you're watching. I did feel as if the temperature of the climate kind of changed a little bit depending on what you were looking at, but
yeah, and this is where people are just sinking their teeth into this case. We see parents of missing children all the time. Yeah. And everybody handles it differently. Even our case, which will be next week, but we've been researching it, of a missing mother in Florida. The mother in that case, granted, this, the interview I watched was years later, but her demeanor is not one of like a grieving mother who is still heartbroken over her daughter. She's heartbroken, but she said even herself, I have 2 other kids that I have to be a parent to. Yeah. And so every single parent handles these situations a little bit differently. Yeah. And one of the things I see a lot of people doing in the criticisms of these interviews or statements and timelines and everything is saying, like, I would never do that. Well, they're not you and you're not them. Yeah. So a lot of people were like, what were they doing on the phone for 3.5 hours? Yeah. Well, I can tell you what, like, I am not a person that talks on the phone, but I have those select friends I have a friend, we won't talk for years, and then we'll pick up the phone and we'll talk for like 3 or 4 hours. Yeah. And when we lived in the same town, we would talk on the phone for 3 hours at a time. It's just one of those people that you just end up talking, and like you just, you know, it just leads to another thing and another thing, and then you get to talking about this, and then you don't even know how much time has gone by. Now, granted, the Proudfoots have been married for a while, and so, but they're also living apart. They're living apart. So he's working in Memphis. You know, she's at in Hendersonville because Sebastian's in school, and he's gone for long periods of time. Maybe he's coming home on the weekends, I don't know, but this particular weekend he wasn't. These projects are set on a deadline, so a lot of times they will work through the weekends, but he was gone for periods of time. So if she's, you know, out and about all day, maybe that was the time that they had to talk to each other. I don't know, but it's just, I think it's very, I guess, irresponsible to say like, oh, because I wouldn't do that, somebody else wouldn't do that. We all are so different. We're different people. We live different lives. We have different habits and preferences. And so I just because I wouldn't do something doesn't mean you wouldn't do something.
Well, and there's no way for her to have known that it would be under fire. Like, you think about some of, even if that's not something she normally did, maybe it was just a one-off, maybe they had something big to talk about. Something happened to Chris at work, and he's filling her in. I mean, no one goes on the phone and then thinks to themselves, this will be dissected one day, especially not in the wake of such tragedy.
I mean, unless it is calculated. But we're not going to get there. No, we're not going there right now. Not yet. So, yeah, the dynamic with Chris and Katie that I think was pointed out quite often is that Chris was supposedly... I mean, there's people out there that question this, but I believe it was confirmed that Chris was in Memphis at this time.
Yes.
Now, there's a lot of people that still don't believe that. I think law enforcement has ways with his phone, with his job, everything in the timelines to confirm whether he was or was not there. I don't know how certain that is, and we're going to talk more about that in the theories episode next time. But... if Chris was not there, and this has been pointed out by a lot of people commenting on their interviews, why was he speaking over Katie? Why was he directing the conversation? Why was he basically in control of that conversation when Katie was the one who spent that last day with Sebastian, that woke up and found him missing? Why was Chris kind of controlling the interviews?
Well, and you do see also, though, and this is something that fortunately Seth doesn't have to deal with, but Katie has been painted pretty harshly throughout this process, and we can go into like why later, but for the most part, she's been under fire, and that has followed her every day since Sebastian's disappearance. And so if you keep that perspective in mind, I think it would make sense that her partner would kind of protectively, in the face of the media, who, you know, are kind of the sharp teeth that can bite and show, you know, the graphics of it, be more protective and more forward, assuming that they've also talked in depth behind closed doors. And so maybe at this point he does feel like he has, you know, first-hand knowledge because he's heard it through so many times and wants to protect her. Because I do know that for the most part, people have gone after her pretty hard and continue to. And whether that's deserved or not, in an interview it can be very intimidating, and maybe that's kind of where he came from in there, but I do agree that that's something to keep in mind.
Well, and that has been pointed out as well, that it may be a protective, you know, act on Chris's part. And we don't have that dynamic, like you said, with Seth, because he's on his own, as he said himself. You know, he's a single man, single father, you know, so he doesn't have a partner that's sitting there kind of in on the conversation with him. But, you know, the language has been dissected a lot. There have been, I don't think that anybody did any kind of dissection of any of Seth's interviews or his behavior or anything, but there was one channel called like the Behavior Panel, and it's 4 guys that sat there, and this was one of the first interviews, so early days. Here it is, the Behavior Panel. So they just kind of like dissected the whole interview. It was the one where they were sitting side by side and Katie was like rocking in the interview. And, you know, they're saying that that's like a self-soothing behavior if somebody is dealing with high stress and anxiety. And then one of the things that they pointed out, which I think is interesting, and also Seth pointed this out too, is the language that they use. They almost never say Sebastian's name.
Yeah.
They say that boy, Bubba, her son, not our son.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, that is jarring a little bit, because as a mother, you know, you want to see a mother, you know, doing this outpouring of, I just want my son Sebastian to come home. Sebastian, if you're out there, you know, I need you to hear this. I need you to come home.
Yeah.
And she's not really ever saying anything. I mean, she says that at the very end of the interview, when they ask, is there anything that you want Sebastian to know or hear? Like anything you want to say to Sebastian.
And they prompt that almost in every single interview.
Right, but it's always at the very end.
Yeah.
And Katie never really, you know, she never really brings that into the interview. And granted, she may just be responding. And sometimes people are just responsive and they're so overwhelmed by the situation that they're not really cognitively functioning at the level that we think that they're capable of.
Right.
But one of the things that I do have to say, and this is, they touched on this. They did not seem concerned about it. I thought it might be like a regional thing. But in this interview, Katie says, when I woke him up for school, he wasn't there. And the wording on that is just a little bit strange, because in all of her other interviews, she says, when I went to wake him up for school, he wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And there's a big difference between when I went to wake him up and when I woke him up for school.
Right.
It may have just been stress and anxiety. And that's the really difficult part, like you said, because before even their very first interview, they were already getting threats. They were already under scrutiny. And this is 7 days in. I think they did their first public interview on a YouTube channel. I mean, besides just maybe like the press releases with law enforcement. But their first like interview with the news media, it was with her channel, I believe, was called Duchess at the time. It's Dutchy now, I think. But she's somehow related to Katie's sister or aunt or something like that. So somehow they like did a thing where they talked and then they got on and spoke on this panel, not visible. And they've got a lot of, I guess, kind of scrutiny for that too. That in the first few interviews that they did, they were not on camera. So there was one where they were just like, they had their hands, which was really weird. And they said that they were too emotional and they didn't want to be on camera. Most people want that emotion to show. They want people, whoever might have taken their child, to see how distraught they are about their child missing. So that was kind of weird. And then, so I'm just going to, I don't want to really taint it too bad right now, but I just have to put, since we're on the topic of the behavior panel right now, one of the quotes from one of the men on the panel said, so I just have, before I say that, no, I'll say this first, and then I'll just to kind of like round it back around. But he said that this woman is a psychopathic genius if she did this. Now, I don't necessarily think so.
Yeah.
But for him to say that, and granted, they all said, like, this is just from this one interview, we can't make, leaps and bounds.
Yeah.
And they're basing it on their experience, their training, whatever. But all of them said that they're talking in present tense the entire time. Mm-hmm. In all of the interviews with Katie, there was only one time where she slipped up. Mm-hmm. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But they all said that even like her rocking behavior wasn't, necessarily alarming. They said there was a couple of facial expressions from Chris that were kind of like, I don't know what to think about this. Yeah. But they said overall, they didn't get a sense that they were lying or that they had pre-rehearsed this statement. Their reactions seemed genuine. The one reaction that they said seemed very genuine. I noticed that she did the exact same thing on another interview. So then I started to question that genuineness a little bit. But yeah, so I mean, overall, they were, not sitting there going, oh, they absolutely are behind this. They pretty much came out of this about evaluation saying, everything seems to kind of check out. Like, and that's, I think, why he said that she's a psychopathic genius if she did this, because she is completely presenting as a grieving mother. Yeah. And the other thing, too, to speak on that is, according to Katie, they both did a polygraph test and passed. Mm-hmm. So again, like, if she passed the polygraph, right, and she is complicit in what happened with Sebastian, then how does she pass that polygraph test? I agree. Yeah. So the other thing, too, so the very first interview on this Dutchy channel, statement that Chris made that kind of was strange to me, and it's one that hasn't really been brought up by anybody, which I'm really surprised, because people have dissected and attacked so many of the things that have been said by Chris and Katie Proudfoot in their interviews and their dynamics and everything. But this struck me, and maybe because of my background as opposed to the general public's background, but in that first interview, they're talking about, and he said this multiple times in multiple interviews, about how they didn't expect it to get this big. Why does anybody expect anything to get this big if you weren't expecting it in the first place? Yeah. Right. Like, for him to say we weren't expecting it to get this big is kind of a weird thing for me.
Which you would think would be quickly followed with, but I'm so glad that it has.
Right, which it does not.
It does not. It does not get followed up with that.
Yeah. But what he said this time, he's talking about all of the search parties and all of the aerial and all of the, all of the different things that they brought out for this search. And this is what he said. And I found it so odd. And I find it so odd that nobody else has commented on this. But he said, this will be a case to be studied. Why are you 7 days into your stepson missing saying that this will be a case to be studied? Like, it's a case? It's not a missing child. It's a case,
which typically means there's been a death.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
and so
or foul play. Yeah. So if Sebastian just happened to run off or run away or like snuck out because he had some secret rendezvous that nobody knew about, and then something went awry, like, how did this become a case? Yeah.
Or why is he already expecting it to be studied by the masses, as if, like, and we see some of the really popular, like, murders out there, and they have all these documentaries and stuff. Yeah. And it would be weird, because normally that is done after, like, much later, that he's like, oh, this is going to be like that.
Not almost 7 days after he went missing. Not within the first month of your child going missing. You're already speculating about this being a case to be studied. Yeah. So that is weird to me, and I'm going to bring that up when we talk about theories. Yeah. But the other thing that he said too, which in the same interview, and he said it, I believe, like, because they repeat the, that's the thing about these interviews too, is that everybody's asking the same questions, so they're getting the same answers.
Very repetitive.
But he said, so I heard different things, but basically Katie said that when she couldn't find Sebastian, she called Chris, who was in Memphis. Chris said he was working, so he's got the mic for his work in one ear, and he's got like a, head earbud in the other ear for his phone. So he's talking to Katie, and he said that he called the sheriff's office, but then another time he said that he three-wayed with Katie and called the sheriff's office. But he said, I made the call and reported it to the sheriff's office because that's what we are supposed to do. Which, again, has not really been addressed by the public, like, in the way that I thought it would be. But again, that may be because I have a little bit different perspective here. Yeah. But to me, if I'm the parent, I wouldn't say I made the call to the sheriff's office because that's what we are supposed to do. I would say I called because we can't find our son and we don't know what else to do. Right. So a lot of times you can get kind of in the weeds with the semantics and stuff, kind of like with Katie saying, like, when I woke him up for school, he wasn't there. Yeah. And then this, because that's what we are supposed to do, instead of because we didn't know what else to do. In this particular interview, actually not this one, the one where she said she picked up her niece, so it's varied a little bit. This is the one I jotted down. This was the one where they were sitting and she was rocking, where she said she picked up her niece because she had looked at Chris and he nodded as in confirmation, which was weird. It was one of the things that the behavior panel picked up. But what stayed pretty consistent is that they went to BJ's. Who knows how many people were with them, whether it was just her and Sebastian or the niece, or also the Chris's sister and the nieces, and everybody went together. We don't know. So they went to BJ's, which is a bulk grocery store, for those of you that don't know, because it's also a restaurant in certain places. Yeah. It was one that I used to go to in California. So I was kind of confused for a moment too, why they went to BJ's and then went to Texas Roadhouse. But it is we just recently started getting those the last few years out here in Tennessee. So it was a bulk grocery store. Then they said that they went home, put the groceries away. The aunt who posted on that Facebook post said that Sebastian was happy and was excited to go home and put groceries away. Then they went to the bowling alley. I don't think they bowled, though. I think he just played some games or something like that. Then they went to dinner at Texas Roadhouse, and there's actual video footage of them at dinner at Texas Roadhouse, and I believe they left there around 6:30 p.m. Then Katie said that Sebastian took out the trash, took it, the can out to the road because that was one of his chores, and that she told him to go to bed at 9 p.m., that he was in his room playing, doing stuff, and she went in there and told him to get ready for bed and to go to bed. So this part has not been consistent in every single one of her interviews. Some interviews, I believe that very first interview, she did not mention the thud or the noise in Sebastian's room at all. It was not even mentioned. And so there's times where she hasn't mentioned it. There's times where she said she heard a noise or heard noises, but never, said anything further. And then there's ones where she said she heard a thud or a thump, and that she yelled out to Sebastian, "I don't know what you're doing in there, but get to bed." And then there's another one where she says, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm fine." But most of them don't. And that's been a piece that has kind of changed throughout all of her interviews. So did she actually yell out to him? Did he respond? We don't know. A lot of people are crucifying her for not going in and checking on her child. He was not 5. Although he was autistic, and, he did have some, delays and stuff like that, he was still a teenager. So, I wouldn't be going in and checking on a 15-year-old if he yelled back to me. But again, did he? We don't know, because that has not stayed consistent in her statements.
And this is also an area where I think parenting styles are just different. And, especially with this, we can't necessarily place judgment on a situation that we don't have ourselves, and, can say with 100% certainty that should have been done or not. So
and he is autistic, but he is also 15, and it was just down the hall. She said that his room is just down the hall from the living room, and she was on the couch at the time. And I believe his bedroom door was open, so she could hear. And but that's been something that has not been consistent through all of this. And I believe, like I said, in that first interview, she didn't even say anything about the noise at all. So then she said that, so this is another thing where she has not been consistent in all of her stories. She said that she fell asleep on the couch. She told Nancy Grace that she was reading a chapter in her book, a chapter for her class. And she said she was taking classes at DeVry, but then she dropped out after Sebastian went missing, dropped her classes. But she also said that her and Chris were on the phone for like 3 or some hours. And basically they said that they got on the phone around 9:30, 9:45, and this is what Chris said, because she kind of just said, "And then I went to bed." Well, Chris kind of picked up, so in this first interview, it's interesting, again, the dynamics, because she kind of was just like, "And then around 10 o'clock I went to bed." And then Chris was like, "Oh, actually, I need to interject here and clarify a few things." And so he says, "We got on the phone around 9:30, 9:45, and we spoke for a long time. Law enforcement has already verified all of that. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of an interesting piece, right? So that was in the very first interview. So then later she's saying these other things about how she, she fell asleep or she was reading this chapter. But how are you talking on the phone and reading a chapter?
Not to mention, I don't think that Chris ever mentions that he hears her checking on her son, because they should have been talking at the same time as the noise occurred.
Yeah.
We don't see him
ever confirming that.
No. Yeah. And so that's another kind of interesting situation. Yeah. I mean, maybe there has been times where I've seen him kind of nodding, like confirming, but it's almost, like he's confirming that that's what they've discussed instead of, I mean, because he wasn't there. And that's been one of the things that's been really problematic for a lot of people, is that he has been speaking for her and he has been confirming things that how could he confirm because he wasn't there. Yeah. So, that is kind of questionable. So that's been, I guess, one of the major issues with her interviews. But again, these behavioral people who, are basically, like human lie detectors are saying that it's less likely that it's a contrived or rehearsed story that they've come up with if her story changes from time to time. Right. Now, if her story is changing in certain ways, it can be more problematic. So, and that's one of the things that I do have to agree with a little bit that I have heard, is that it's almost like the Proudfoots were like learning from the criticism that they were getting. Yeah. So the things that they were kind of getting negative feedback on were kind of adjusted and accounted for in future interviews. Mm-hmm. And whether that was intentional, whether they were, studying and like, intentionally kind of adjusting their behavior, I don't know. Yeah. It's so difficult to tell. And I just want to throw this out here because, again, it's something that has not been addressed. Somebody was just tearing apart that Texas Roadhouse video. Yeah. Just saying that she was such an uninvolved mother and it didn't look like they were having a good time and there was no engagement and Katie was on her phone and, just basically ripping her apart for her behavior and her demeanor. Yeah. And I just want to throw this out there because we don't know. Could Katie also be on the spectrum? Could that explain her behavior, her demeanor, the way that she talks, her self-soothing? Like, that is a common thing that autistic kids do. Yeah. And if it's something that she did when she was younger and then she's in this high stress situation and so she's reverting back to, I mean, people do it in general. It's not just, it's not just limited to people who are on the spectrum. It's a self-soothing behavior. Those, are not limited to just people on the spectrum. However, what if she is as well? Yeah. And maybe she's not, I mean, it's called a spectrum for a reason. And people are on every single aspect of that spectrum. Yeah. But there's a case, it was just recently covered. I can't remember who covered it. I think it may have been a Dateline special thing. Maybe Josh Mankiewicz covered it. I think I'll have to double check that. But where this man is on death row in Texas for killing his child, shaken baby syndrome, when there was another person who got off for that exact same thing, and this man was completely freed on all of his charges and everything. And there's this other man who's still on death row, and when they figured out that his affect and his response to his daughter, dying and all of this stuff, that it was dulled and it was changed because he was autistic. And they at that time, we're just starting to learn about this. We're just it's just starting to become more mainstream awareness of what does it look like to be autistic. And both so many people have said this in this whole situation, that no two autistic people have the exact same behaviors and symptoms, and it's a spectrum, and everybody has their own unique expression. And so
I just wanted to throw it out there. I have no way to diagnose anybody. I did not ever have any interactions with Katie, and I did not find any videos or any kind of thing that showed what her behavior or her, demeanor and what her personality was like outside of this situation. But I just don't want to discount the fact that, we may be crucifying somebody who just also is on the spectrum like her son.
Yeah.
And may not be behaving in the way that people would expect her to behave. And it's just her coping mechanism.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that that's a free pass or anything, but I'm just saying, like, sometimes, suspicious behavior is not necessarily what we think it is.
Right.
And so I just, like I said, I just want to throw that out there. Not that I have any grounds to say that whatsoever. I am not able to make a diagnosis through these, interviews at all. So I'm not saying that, but it's just, sometimes there's other reasons for people to behave in the way that they behave that aren't necessarily nefarious.
Agreed.
But what kind of stood out to you? Like, what were kind of the things that were kind of like, oof, that was hard?
I think one of the biggest things for me is, and I saw an interview where she was directly asked, like, what do you think about the rumors that point to you being the suspect? And I felt that her response was a little avoidant instead of ever really discussing it straight on or even saying, like, it wasn't me. I think it's crazy that people are doing it. Like, there's no, it was not me.
I know.
Instead, you get kind of like a misdirect. And I have her quoted saying, like, directly after they're like, what do you think about the rumors? Her response was, pause and remember what we're doing here, and that is finding Sebastian.
I know.
And I was so incongruent.
Yes.
It's like two pieces of two different conversations, but it's actually just one. And so to me, it struck me as odd. And then I saw her do it in at least 2 more interviews after that. And where we had talked before about the bang in the night, I felt like as the interviews progressed, she held on to this. There was a bang, and I verbally asked, and I verbally got a response. I felt like that became her truth through the interviews. I felt like she never really ever addressed no, they're wrong.
Yeah.
And we talked about like this just now. Like, maybe it's something she doesn't feel she needs to declare. No one knows, but you would think in the dozens that she's been interviewed that there'd at least be one, but it does seem,
especially when they're directly asking her. And that I made notes on that too, because that was strange for me that somebody who had nothing to do with it and was really terrified and concerned about their child, it would seem, again, we can't put a blanket, expectation of behavior across every single mother who's ever, missing a child, because that's not how this works. But it would seem like it would be human nature just to say, I can't believe anybody thinks that I have anything to do with this. I absolutely did not have any part in Sebastian missing. I mean, that would seem to be the first response, but you're right. She does not address it at all. She never claims that she has nothing to do with it. She never has any protestations of innocence or, of not having anything to do with Sebastian's. And the other thing too, that I thought was kind of interesting, again, it was not something that I really saw addressed that much, was every time they would kind of ask her about Sebastian, she would not focus on Sebastian. She would say, there are a lot of other missing children.
Yeah.
And she would kind of expand this conversation out to all these other missing children that also need to be looked for.
Yeah.
And to me, I think, is that, because I think about this a little bit too, just because I'm on the other side of it too, but the amount of money, the amount of time, the amount of resources that has gone into looking for Sebastian.
Yeah.
So if you are somebody who knows where Sebastian is, knows what happened to him, knows he's probably not going to be found, but you see all of these people coming out, and you see all of these resources, and you see, people hanging flyers and doing all this stuff, and you're thinking, gosh, like, like they're doing all of this and they're not going to find him, then it kind of makes sense why you would say, but there's all these other missing children that need these resources and should be getting this attention. So most parents are going to be like, I need my child found. Like, I know there's other people going through this and I hate that for them, but I need my child found.
Right.
But she does the complete opposite by, again, like you pointed out, you know, with that, not making, you know, denials, is that she's expanding beyond Sebastian, almost saying like Sebastian is not the most important thing to focus on here. It's all of these missing children.
Right. And then almost trying to point to, well, maybe he's just part of the pattern of something bigger than this.
Which is just not what a mother would say if she thought that her son just disappeared and she doesn't know what happened to him.
And I've also, in our experiences in the cases we've reviewed, I've never actually seen any family of a victim saying, what's been done is enough.
Right.
You know, I think we always have this sense of like, but there could be more and we need more. And just like you said, instead of that kind of, yes, I'm so grateful, but we need to continue. It's almost like, well, there's a bunch of other cases out here, almost in the sense, and she doesn't ever directly say it, but almost in the sense of like, let's put this energy elsewhere.
Yeah. And that's one thing that's been brought up a lot is that they say, because Seth said that his volunteers were getting followed and flyers were coming down. It's like, who would be trying to prevent people from looking for this child? And there's so much drama with the social media, with the content creators and the United Cajun Army that came up here to help look for him after they were helping with the Riley String case in Nashville. And apparently they pulled out at one point because they were getting threats. And like this one content creator was like, there was no police reports filed, and it's like so certain about it. Well, just because they weren't filed with the Sumner County Sheriff's Office doesn't mean they weren't filed with another jurisdiction. And the thing about police reports is they have to be filed in the jurisdiction where they happened. So if they were staying in Nashville because they were based here because of Riley Strain and they were getting threats while they were staying in Nashville, they would report it to Nashville.
Right.
They wouldn't report it to Sumner County. So Sumner County can say, yeah, we don't have any reports of that. It doesn't mean that it wasn't reported. So that's another thing we have to be really careful about, is like stating things as fact when we don't really know that they are fact. And that's one thing that we try to be really careful about, is like, this is all speculation. Like we can say, like we can make quotes, but even these quotes can be taken out of context. So you have to be really careful. You know, even with us, like, you know, we do our best to fact check and, you know, to, you know, present this information as flawlessly as possible, but we're human. So, you know, sometimes we get things wrong too, and we don't expect you to not fact check us, you know? So, this was, see, that was exactly my notes. When asked about claims they did something to Sebastian, she never protests or denies. She just shifts the conversation to rumor and source, and then she keeps saying all the missing children. I thought I had expounded on that a little bit, but I guess not. And again, she was talking, they always spoke in present tense. There was just that one interview that she did by herself, which was very rare for her to do an interview without Chris. But she said he would have, and then caught herself, took a deep breath, like refocused, and then said, turned 16. So she was trying to say he turned 16, but she started to say he would have. And so that was something that like people really attached, you know, their claws into too, saying like, oh, she slipped up. Chris wasn't there to, you know, keep her on track. And so like saying that, oh, she said it in past tense. And that's one of those hard things too, because, you know, you haven't seen your son in over a year. So it's not, you know, he would have been 16 had he been home.
Right.
You know, it's not necessarily an admission of guilt or a use of past tense. So if she just constantly was going back and forth between present tense and past tense, that would be more concerning.
Yeah.
I think this phrasing, it's kind of like the phrasing of, I woke him up for school and he wasn't there. People are kind of like, that's just, whatever. And I think that's kind of the case with this one too, even though people really want to like sink their teeth into that one, is he would have turned 16. I think it's just kind of like he would have, if he had been here, we would have had a party for him. He would have, turned 16 this year. And it's not necessarily, what they're making it out to be. Yeah. The other thing too, that I really kind of wanted to talk about. So there was a lot of talk about Sebastian's behavior. Like he wasn't a runner. Like he loved animals. He loved to swim. Autistic kids are drawn to water, but Chris said because he doesn't like to be dirty, that he's not a kid that's going to go jump out into a lake or a pond or a river. He wants to go to a swimming pool. He doesn't like bugs. So all of that, him not walking out without shoes, like that's been a huge problem from the very beginning. We're going to kind of touch on that in our theories as well, and why that supports or doesn't support certain things. But one of the issues I think that a lot of people had, and I didn't see it as drastically as I thought I would based on other people's comments, is how they felt that Chris and Katie were being really derogatory and like making fun of Sebastian. And I didn't see that like as bad as I thought, based on what people, and that could just be like the polarization that happens if they're on Seth's side and they think that Chris and Katie are guilty of something. But one of the things that I did want to touch upon, because it's going to play into the theories, is that Katie said that he can be aggressive if he's upset. She said he doesn't really hit and punch and throw, but he gets an aggressive stance and then chooses not to talk. I think that's really important because autistic kids, especially teenagers who have hormones going on, and they are figuring out who they are, and they're becoming adults, but they're like, in this case, they said, that Sebastian was 15 years old, but he was not mentally 15 years old yet. So his maturity was kind of lagging behind, his actual age. And so you have a kid that's, kind of a kid, but he's, in a teenager body, and he's got hormones and he's becoming a man, but there's a lot of stuff going on. And sometimes, depending on, what their, autistic traits are and behaviors and stuff and what else is going on. Because a lot of times, you can have kids that, have other issues besides autism, but that are coming into play, like behavioral issues and things like that aren't necessarily tied to autism. But they can be aggressive because of frustration, and it's not aggressive in the conscious, intentional way that it would be for a person who doesn't have autism. And especially as a growing teenage boy, not knowing how their aggression is becoming problematic. And so for her to actually admit that in her interview without actually even being prompted, they were asking like, what was he like, and stuff like that. But he says, she says that he can be aggressive. Chris said he was rambunctious. He was always hungry, smart, goofy. Both Chris and Seth said that he had issues with personal space, and that can be a problem when he's trying to socialize. Apparently he didn't have a lot of friends, but he really wanted friends. But when you have those issues with personal space and problems socializing, that's difficult. But they also said that Sebastian thrived on routine, which is also a very common thing for autistic children, is that they really, really, really like their routine. He was high functioning, and which is why I think he was able to go back and forth between parents, because that can be really disruptive for, an average child. But then you have an autistic child who just really, thrives on their routine. It can be pretty disruptive, but apparently he was doing okay on that. But one of the language with Katie too is that she said it was a good weekend. And Seth said that his interpretation of that meant that he wasn't acting up. And Katie also made the statement that it was a calm night,
Yeah.
which again implies that there was non-comb nights.
Yeah.
So that's, just something to kind of keep in mind, is that we see this cute 15-year-old boy, like he's small for his age. He's autistic, but we have to understand that there's a lot of dynamics that go along with autism and the special needs of that. And again, it's a spectrum, so high functioning, there's a lot of things in between.
Yeah.
But they specifically said, his parents, specifically said, that he's got these behavioral issues and that he does thrive on routine, and he's got these particularities that are going to be a factor in him disappearing and whether he went on his own volition or not. So, also, Seth said that his behavior was very different at his house than what Chris and Katie were describing at their house. He said that they described Sebastian when he was like 4 or 5. Oh, and that was the other thing too, is that Seth said that Chris and Katie had Sebastian in pull-ups at their house, and he had to wear them at school. And for a 15-year-old to have to wear pull-ups because he's having incontinence at school, apparently Chris got frustrated because Katie was having to go to school and bring change of clothes for him all the time. Seth said that he didn't wear them at his house. So that right there tells me that there was a problem. Because if he was able to go without them, of course, he was only there for a couple days over the weekend. Was there something going on at school? Was there something going on at home?
Yeah.
For a 15-year-old boy to have to get to the point where his parents are putting him in pull-ups.
Yeah.
So that's concerning to me.
Absolutely.
And it's just kind of something that just kind of got thrown in there in one of the interviews with Seth, and we didn't really touch on it before, but I just kind of wanted to bring that up because it's kind of a big deal for him to be 15 years old and still wearing pull-ups. That's alarming to me. Usually there's a reason for a child to be wetting themselves, and especially somebody at his age. Now, there may have been some physical things going on that we didn't know about. There may be, medical things that we don't know about. But if it's a behavioral issue, then there's, that's concerning to me that he's 15 years old, even if he's not 15 years old mature-wise, that he's wearing pull-ups at age 15. I just wanted to say one last thing about what Seth said in an interview about Sebastian saying that he didn't think that Chris and Katie liked him because they yelled at him all the time. Now, I think anybody with a special needs child knows that it takes a lot of extra patience and it takes a lot of extra work, and you have to learn the particular, aspects of your child's behavior and then learn how to manage that. And some people are really well equipped to do that. Some people have all of the patience, and they're going to take the time to learn, and they're going to really work with their child to manage their behavior and, just to help them thrive despite whatever it is that they are struggling with or whatever, diagnosis that they have. And there's some parents who are just not mentally and emotionally capable of giving the child the care that they need. Yeah. And that's really unfortunate, but it's just the fact of the matter. I mean, there's parents out there that are not fit to be parents of, average children. Yeah. And then if you have, a special needs child, that just exacerbates the problem. So we don't know what Katie's capacity is as a parent under normal circumstances. And then she has an autistic special needs child who is high functioning, but there's these behavioral issues. There's this trauma from when he was a child that hasn't been completely dealt with. There's the wetting himself at school and I think at home as well. And so there's all of these other things that are additional stressors on being a parent. Yeah. And like I said, some parents are amazing and they do an amazing job and, they do so well with their special needs children. But there's just some people who they just don't have the capacity to be a parent under ideal circumstances. And then they're put in these positions. Now, am I saying that Katie is not a good parent? No, because I don't have any baseline for that. I don't have any idea of knowing whether she was a good parent or not. But I just wanted to throw that out there because it's so easy to sit here and judge through these interviews, through the statements that were made from Seth and Chris and Katie, and we just don't know. Yeah. We weren't in their home. We weren't behind those closed doors. Mm-hmm. We don't know what Katie's relationship was with Sebastian, when they're just home, just the two of them hanging out. So, but I just wanted to throw that out again because it's so easy for us to sit here and judge other people and what they should or shouldn't be doing or what we think they should or should be capable of. We don't know. We just don't know. Not everybody is blessed with a really great mother, and not everybody's blessed with, an ideal circumstance, and not everybody's blessed with the capacity to deal with what they're dealt with. Yeah. And it's unfortunate because we have situations, that it's just really not fair to the children. And, but that's our society, and that is the reality of the life that we live in. Not everybody is blessed with perfect circumstances or a patient perfect parent, and we just have to deal with that. And but does it cross the line into neglect, or does it cross the line into a situation where that child shouldn't be in that home anymore? Again, that's not our decision to make. That's why the DCS calls were made. That's why the welfare checks were done. All of that was done the right way. Like, all of that was done through the proper channels, and we as the public do not get to sit here and judge based on information, these little snippets that we see online. And I just to wrap this up, because we're going to get into a little bit more of this in our theories episode next, is we very strongly believe in not doxing people. Seth said over and over and over again, even throughout his frustration, that everyone is innocent until proven guilty. And I do have to say, though, that Chris said that everybody was cleared. Nobody's cleared. Yeah. I think maybe Seth, because he was very documented at his place of work, and he didn't have a way to leave and come back. Maybe not a suspect at this point, but I don't believe that that's a case that everybody's been cleared.
No, and it's definitely not officially published anywhere.
Right. So, I know that was put out there, but I have to put that out as well, as that I don't think anybody's officially been cleared. We don't know what happened to Sebastian, so how can we say that nobody's at fault for something that we don't know exactly what occurred? But this one, I mean, this has been a roller coaster of a case, because we have this missing child, and then we have so many people invested in this child, and all with the best of intentions, all wanting to see Sebastian come home, all wanting to see him safe, all wanting, the best for him, which is great. But we just have to be really careful. We can have a public opinion, but we cannot be the judge and jury and the executioner. We don't get to make those decisions. We only have little pieces of this information that are disseminated to us. Seth has said over and over again, because they'll ask him about the investigation, he goes, I don't know, I'm not part of the investigation. And they'll ask him, well, what about your opinion being in law enforcement? He's like, I'm not an investigator, I work in corrections. And he's been very, I think, level-headed and very, just very blunt about that it's like, I don't know. And if he doesn't know, then how can any of us know any better than him, as a parent in this situation? So, we aren't, we, as in the general public, are not investigators. I am a private investigator, and I do have law enforcement experience, but that's beside the point. The public is not typically investigators. And even if they were, I am. I don't have the inside knowledge to this case. I do not have the information that Chris and Katie have that nobody else has. I don't have the information that Seth has that nobody else has. I don't have the information that law enforcement, that the sheriff's office has that nobody else has. I cannot make a determination on this case.
Yeah.
And I have experience. I have, insight. I am a licensed private investigator, but I cannot say who is or isn't guilty in this. And I'm not going to. I'm not going to sit here and say that I can based on any of that. And so I just have to caution again how dangerous it is, not only to the people involved who may not be guilty, but also to the investigation, to be disseminating information and making false claims and making accusations without any basis. How destructive that is, and how it does not benefit Sebastian at all. It never benefits the victims if you're making wild accusations without actual proof to back it up. And so that's why, in our policies, membership policies and stuff, we have a very strict no doxing rule. It's not our job. It's not our job to be out recording and watching what suspects are doing. It's not our job to go out and try to, stalk somebody.
Intimidate.
Yeah, intimidate, threaten. I know that they said that they were getting threats. The United Cajun Army was supposedly getting threats. Why are we doing this? What purpose does that serve, and how does it serve Sebastian? Because I do not see how it serves Sebastian in any way.
I agree with you. No, it's so important to make sure that if you're going to speculate, make it clear that it's speculation, and then, of course, respect people's space and allow an investigation to continue. So,
yeah, and people have to still live their lives. There's still, they don't have other children, but there was one picture I saw of her out to dinner with Faith, and they were like, how could she possibly be eating? Well, she still has another stepdaughter, who should not be punished for whatever happened to Sebastian. And we don't know what happened to Sebastian at this point. I mean, a lot of speculation, but we do not know. We do not have a body. We do not have a video of him in another location proving that he's still alive. We do not know what happened to Sebastian at this point. So she still has to be a stepmother to Faith. Faith still has to eat. And if Faith wants to go out to a restaurant, then there's nothing wrong with Katie taking her out to a restaurant.
Not to mention the advantage of if Sebastian is just out there wandering, it's helpful to have all parents out visibly so you can come home. So,
yep. Well, we're gonna wrap this up because this is getting kind of long. We'll divulge on a little bit more when we're talking about theories, because there's a lot of stuff that there's a lot of theories out there, and then there's a lot of stuff that kind of supports or kind of I guess disproves or kind of takes away from that theory. So we're going to kind of go through all of that in the next episode that we cover on Sebastian. But we just want, since it is the 26th, and it is the 2-year anniversary of Sebastian going missing, we just want to send our hearts out to Sebastian, to his family, and to the community, because I know this has been very difficult. So many people have poured out their time, their energy, their hearts into finding Sebastian. And I know that Sebastian is still so strong in so many people's minds and hearts out there, even 2 years later. So we just want to, send out all our thoughts and prayers to everybody who's still out there, looking for Sebastian and following this case and really wanting to see a resolution.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.